You cannot go on social media today and see and not and avoid, "Oh my god, this person's a Gemini." "Oh, guess what sign this is?" "Oh my god, this person's totally a Taurus." I'm just like, "Okay, it's interesting." Joining me today, I have someone talk about all things astrology, star signs, and the first things first, is there any truth to these things?
That's a fantastic question, and the answer is I have I have absolutely no idea. I study it. I mean, I study it academically, but I'm never in the business of telling people what to believe or what they shouldn't believe. If you say to someone that, oh, astrology isn't scientific, well, they go, it's a matter of belief. You can't, scientifically
Okay,
prove God. You can't scientifically prove angels. You probably can't scientifically prove astrology. Personally, I really am not particularly interested in whether it's real or not. I'm more interested in
okay.
wondering why people would believe what they do and what that tells us about society as a whole.
Dope, dope, dope. So let's unpack that then. Give us the briefest history lesson. Where did it come from? Why has it been such a part and parcel of human history?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and it's such an interesting history.
Yeah.
Astrology today often talks about, sun signs and whatnot. You quite humorously pointed out that every time you're on social media, someone's talking something about some sign, and more often than not, it's talking trash, right? Man, I hate those
Yeah.
Geminis. Man, Sagittarius is the worst, right? It's very
Exactly.
common. But in reality, the history is very deep and it's very complicated.
Okay.
And some of it is not clearly understood. But we assume, or the kind of evidence that we have, is that the earliest examples of astrology probably come from the Babylonian period in ancient history. So
Okay.
we're talking about thousands and thousands of years ago. And
Wow.
we have evidence in cuneiforms of people talking about certain things happening in the heavens and that having an effect on the world around them. So they'll note, for
Okay.
example, oh, the red star has risen. That must mean that we're going to have a famine of some sort. So these early astral
Mm.
omens or celestial omens then get picked up in the sort of first century or so by the Hellenic world. And that's when we start to see a more systematized approach to this in which you divide up the actual heavens into an ecliptic of 12 zodiac signs, along with seven
Mm.
classical planets, starting from Mercury, ending with Saturn. And where all of these are placed within this ecliptic of 12 zodiacs then has an effect on a person's birth, their life, their future, whether someone will become a king or whether someone will die early or whether they'll get married or not. This is then further
Okay.
picked up by the Muslims and the Arabs and the Persians in the 8th
Yeah.
and the 10th century CE and developed into the astrology we know today. This is passed down into Europe and then eventually, unfortunately, it dies out kind of in the 18th century,
Okay.
goes away, and then all of a sudden, newspapers start. And with the rise of newspaper come with the idea that, hey, if we're going to sell these papers, we need something to catch people's attention. And that's the birth
Yes.
of modern sun signs. So sun signs are intimately tied to the idea of selling newspapers, a little bit of capitalist history there, but they are a remnant, if you will, a sort of a vestigial remnant of a much older, deeper pre-modern science that goes all the way back to the Babylonians, to the Greeks, and
Wow.
even to the Muslims.
So historically, there was like this kind of interplay of whatever month you're born in. Did it get as specific as the day as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So once we start seeing in Hellenic astrology the emergence of
Yeah.
the idea that you can calculate the specific time of a person's birth, at the moment that
Okay.
you're born, a certain sign is rising over the horizon. This was known as the ascendant. And so the
We
ascendant
have to break
then,
this down for me,
I know,
Professor,
so the
please. So,
ascendant,
okay, so what we're talking about? We're talking about. I'm trying to picture it in my head. Yeah.
yeah,
So we're splitting it up into 12 zodiac signs, and
yes.
each zodiac sign correlates with what?
Each zodiac sign correlates with a sort of time period within the year. It starts with
Okay.
Aries, which is springtime or the vernal
Okay.
equinox, right? And it
Okay.
ends with Pisces. So there's a way of dividing up the calendar. That's the movement of the
Okay.
sun though. But so
Okay.
many people are born within a particular month. So how does this become
Yes.
more personalized, if you will. And so this pre-modern
Okay.
spiritual science, if you will, the Greeks, what they
Yeah.
did is that they would look at the moment of a person's birth, what sign was rising. That would be considered
Yes.
what's known as the ascendant. So this would be the sign literally on the horizon of your birth. And then from that sign, working in
Okay.
order, they would then catalog the horoscope. And based off of that exact moment, whether the planets were in the zodiac. So not just the sun. Your Mercury is in Gemini and your Venus is
Yeah,
in
because we hear it all the
Scorpio.
time. Oh my God, guys, I'm just sorry. Venus is in retrograde right now. I'm having a bad moment.
Yeah, yeah. The Mercury in retrograde, or as Twitter likes to call it, Mercury in Gatorade, is a
Yes.
very, very, very popular stereotype, or a very popular sort of story. And the idea is that the movement of the planets, and in particular this
Yeah.
instance, Mercury, would have some type of effect on people's communication. Why? Because Mercury
Mm.
was classically associated with communication. So it actually gets quite
Wow.
precise. This is why, as an
Wow.
academic, when I study this, I often tell people that we're not just studying, superstitions that people believed in the past, but that we're genuinely
Yes.
studying an ancient form of science, a way of trying to
Wow.
understand a person's place in the broader world. What does it mean to be born
Wow.
in June 15th of whatever? And what does that
Yeah.
mean for you long term? What is your place in the universe, in the world, in the
Wow.
dynasty, and in the city that you lived in?
Wow. So was there like this thing of, was it the same for every single year, for example, or did they pinpoint it to yes? For example, let's say me, I'm born in December 8th, 93. I'm a Sagittarius. Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I supposed to have the same characteristics as everyone born in December 8th throughout
Ah, yes,
throughout
that's a
history?
fantastic question. Yeah. So, how did you personalize if so many people are born on December 8th? Well, your sun
Yes.
sign is Sagittarius, but at the
Yeah.
specific moment that you're born, maybe you have
Yeah.
Gemini rising. So, Gemini would have been on your ascendant, and that would also shape your personality.
Mm.
Then you would ask, where is your moon, right? Was your moon in Virgo, perhaps? That also would have
What
an
do you mean by
impact.
my moon?
So where the position of the moon was at the moment of
Okay.
your birth. So all of the planets would be
Yeah.
placed out onto these 12 zodiacs, not just the sun, but Mercury,
Okay.
Venus, you would even have Jupiter, Saturn, all of these. Where would they be at the exact moment of your birth? Now, part of this
Okay.
in today is really associated with personality, right? We often talk about,
Yes.
oh, I'm a Sagittarius. That means, I'm a flirt. or I'm a
I mean,
I'm a
I think I can attest to that fact, but
right? Or I'm a Taurus and I really love to eat, or whatever it is. But in
okay, yeah.
actuality, the majority of the horoscope was very dedicated towards prognostication, towards predicting the future. It was very little to
Um,
do with personality. Generally, your ascendant
okay.
was, associated with, okay, this person has a particular temperament. They're friendly, they're nice, or this person is inclined towards bad thoughts or whatever. But the
Yeah.
majority of the horoscope would be about, okay, this person's Jupiter happens to be in Sagittarius. That means that this is a person who's going to likely become a king, or this person is going to become a philosopher.
Mm.
So it was fundamentally about understanding people's destiny. It was really a way in which ancient people tried to understand where their place was in the world, trying to make sense of the
Wow.
chaos of life.
Wow. And this knowledge, was this knowledge then tied into, we see in many kind of ancient mythic films, which I personally enjoy. So right now, what's coming to mind is the scene in 300 when we see the king going to the oracle. And the
Yes,
oracle
yes.
saying to him, you're gonna have a lot of loss, whatever it may be. Is that
Mhm.
kind of tied in here?
Yeah, so when I teach my students history, we do a class called Empires of Faith. And one of the things that we talk about is that every ancient civilization had a way of interacting with the gods, a way of understanding divinity.
Mm,
And this is
okay.
still, even to this day, I mean, we can try to dismiss it as a sort of ancient belief, but we pray for guidance, right? People who are Muslim,
Yeah.
Christian, or Jewish have prayers of guidance, right? And
Yeah.
looking for signs from God. Well, the ancient people did it
Yes.
as well. And they have a variety of different oracles throughout the world. In ancient China, they would look at bones that would crack in a fire, oracle bones that they would interpret.
Wow.
But in ancient Greece, and in particular in the Islamic world and the medieval world, it was
Yes.
astrology. It was a way of understanding what it was that was going to happen, what it was that the divine wanted to happen, the will of God or the will of the gods, trying to understand what it fundamentally meant. As an example of this, most of the wars that we find in the medieval era, particularly during the time of the Abbasids, are timed
Yes.
based off of astrologers. They would turn to these
Wow.
astrologers and ask, what do I do next? What does this mean? So, for example, you mentioned Sagittarius. It was quite common
Yes.
that the Abbasids would wage war during the season of Sagittarius, because Sagittarius was the season of war. When the sun entered Sagittarius,
Okay.
who was which was the sign of the warrior, the sign of the centaur, the sign of the horse, you would wage war. But when the sun entered into Aquarius, you would need to stop, because Aquarius was the time of peace. Now, part of the reason for
Wow.
this was that Aquarius happened to rule over winter, and so the rains would start, and this would be an
Okay,
untenable
okay,
time
okay.
for battle. And so, what we're seeing is that this ancient form of knowledge was not just a way of understanding the world around you, but also a way of organizing your daily activities, whether that was as an individual
Wow.
or it was as a king or ruler of some sort.
That's super interesting. I mean, you and I obviously are Muslim.
Yeah.
So when we hear a lot of people today in social media or in general throughout history, people will say, "Oh, this is, this is absolute disbelief to any have
Yes.
any kind of
Yeah.
interaction with astrology." But what you're saying then, even people who lived in Muslim majority, even such as far as the rulership,
Oh, yeah.
engage in this.
Yeah, I mean, this is often the pushback I get, right, with when I teach this history, but all good
Yeah.
history challenges our preconceived notions. I always
Mm-hmm.
point out the fact that astrology wasn't just sort of some dilettante science that a couple, weird rulers were into. It was
Yeah.
so integral to medieval Muslim society. It wasn't just a sort of side thing that people did. It was integrated into
Wow.
the science and mathematics and knowledge of the time period. It was related to Al-Khwarizmi's algorithms and emergence of algebra. It was related to Al-Tusi's calculations of the movement of the planets. And it was this whole system of
Wow.
knowledge. And so it was deeply integrated in Islamic society. A prime example of this is the city of Baghdad itself. When
Mm-hmm.
the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads in the medieval period, and they decided to create a new capital, they said, you know what, Damascus, that's for the Umayyads. We're going to create our own city. We're going to
Yeah.
call
Yeah.
it Salam, the city of peace, which we today know as Baghdad. They turned to astrologers. They turned to an astrologer named Mashallah ibn Athari and to an astrologer
Yeah.
known as Naubacht. And they said, we want you to pick a perfect moment for us so that we can build a grand city. And they did. They picked a particular moment for the founding of Baghdad that was associated with astrological principles. They associated with the sun being in Leo, which was the sign of kings, and Sagittarius rising, which was the sign of philosophers and kings. Not only did they
Wow.
pick the specific timing, but even the design of the city. Baghdad was a circular city with a series of rings that was meant to reflect the heavens, the planets, and their movements.
Oh,
So
wow.
astrology was deeply intertwined into medieval Muslim society.
You're blowing my mind. You're actually blowing my mind. So the question is, we go from this deep tradition that's like this ancient scientific knowledge that is actually like trying to work out the will of the divine on earth. How have we
Mhm.
got to what we see today? I have to ask you that then. How have we got to it being so commercialized? And literally, we see things like, I've seen you pull it up as well, but I've seen places like the Shade Room and all these places saying, "Oh, guys, guess what sign this is?" And everyone's like, "Oh my god, this must be a Gemini. Oh my god, it must be a Sagittarius." Like, what happened? What happened?
Yeah, this is such a good question. It's such a fantastic question because there's really two factors here that you've got to talk
Yeah.
about. First is the emergence of modern print capitalism, right? So in the
Okay.
astrology ends up dying with the emergence of modern science. Astrology is deemed unscientific. It's deemed inaccurate, and so forth. It
Okay.
separates formally from astronomy in the 18th century or so. And so astrology is
Okay.
treated as a sort of superstition by scientists. And so it dies out.
Okay.
Most astrologers go away. There's no real main textbooks of astrology. But in the 19th century, with the emergence of print capital, that is newspapers, we see that a
Hmm.
group of basically media personalities and media writers will revive astrology as a way of selling newspapers. And they simplified it. They take it
Oh.
from this complicated sort of pre modern science that involves all sorts of calculations of the exact moment of birth, and they make it simple. Not everyone knows the exact time that they're born, right? Not everyone has
Yes.
a birth certificate, but everyone knows at least the day that they're born. Okay, so you're born,
Mm.
in early June, June 8th. Okay, that makes you a Gemini. You're born in,
Yes.
May 7th. That makes you a Taurus. And then they give very
Yeah.
brief, simple explanations for these signs. Oh, this means that you're inclined towards this type of personality, or you're inclined
Mhm.
towards having a good day, or, Thursday's going to be really rough for you. It was just a sort of fun entertainment activity that
Oh,
was
okay.
associated with newspapers. Then you had
Yes.
the internet. The internet and the age of the millennials and Gen Z brings astrology back to the forefront. It becomes part
Okay.
of internet culture. This is what's so
Yep.
interesting, is that it goes from being this thing that some people are interested in, some people might read their horoscope, but really not go any further than that. But with the
Yeah.
introduction of the internet, suddenly you're now connected in a way that you've never been before. And astrology gets interwoven into
Mm.
internet culture. It becomes a meme, it becomes inside jokes, and it also
Yep.
becomes, most importantly, accessible to everybody. Now
Yes.
anybody can pull up their chart. You can just go to a website, astro.com or whatever, right? And so
Yes.
it's the accessibility of the internet added on top of the history of print capitalism that really brings astrology back into popular consciousness. We are living through a really interesting moment for people like me who
Mhm.
are historians of science and historians of astrology, because people can
Yes.
talk about the revival of astrology, where you're now starting to see, astrologers have Netflix series and they publish massive books that are New York Times bestsellers. This is a
Yep,
really
for real.
interesting moment to live through.
Would you say that we still have true astrologers in our time?
I would say so. There's certainly a revival from I would say the 80s on. There was an attempt by professional astrologers to revive what they call traditional astrology. And traditional
Okay.
astrology was them translating some of the older texts.
Okay.
Part of it involved, kind of rediscovering the English astrologers of the early modern era, 16th and 17th century, like William Lilly. Some of it involved translating older medieval writers like Bonatti, and some of them even involved,
Mm.
finally realizing, oh, wait a minute, there's these Muslim writers as well. And so there is a
Yes.
there is a movement. You can call it the astrology revival movement or the traditional
Okay.
astrology movement, and these are people who are, identify themselves as professional astrologers, but who have a sort of historical bent to them. They're interested
Okay,
in
okay.
the
Makes sense.
historical practice of astrology, not just what we see in the modern practice online or in newspapers.
Yeah, totally. No, I get that. I get that. We spoke a little bit about the kind of Muslims interacting with astrology and how they,
Mhm.
so heavily intertwined. What about other religious faith groups and their interaction with astrology?
Yeah, they're all three of the major
Like the
Abrahamic
Christians, for
faiths.
example.
Yes, without a doubt, they had an integration with astrology. Christianity, particularly in the medieval and Renaissance periods, will find astrology. It won't be as integrated into the society as it is in the Islamic world. I mean, the astrologers of the Islamic world really are major figures. These are people who become
Yes.
important from the 9th century all the way to the 18th century with the Mughals. But they will be a sort of elite group of astrologers in Europe, particularly cardinals, some bishops,
Wow.
a few intellectual court astrologers, and so there will be astrology that is intertwined with Christianity. It is sometimes a tense relationship, just like it is in Islam, just like it is
Yeah.
in
Yep.
Judaism. Judaism itself will also have some very prominent astrologers who will use astrology to try to explain things like the emergence of a Messiah, the emergence of the Jewish faith. Ibn Ezra is a famous Jewish astrologer from the medieval period.
Okay.
And then we also find astrology outside of the sort of Mediterranean, Middle East, and European world in other parts of the world. In South Asia, Vedic astrology or Indic astrology, an ancient practice that intersects with Greek astrology and even intersects with the Islamic world, will become an important
Mm.
religious and spiritual tradition that's thousands of years old and continues until this particular day. And then there's other forms of astrology that I'm not even very familiar with. Chinese astrology that exists, for example,
Wow.
that has a sort of continuous practice. And so astrology is a worldwide phenomenon, and it does touch
Yeah.
on a variety of different religious traditions.
My mind is actually blown right now. I didn't realize it because
It's a
you
lot
know
of
why? Because
information, isn't it?
no, it's amazing because I see your stuff and I'm like, this is so fascinating. But then, and I feel like you've opened up a world to me just in this last 20 minutes, which has been fascinating for me. Because I'm telling you, up until this point, I'm just like, horoscopes, man. You man are just so bored now. And that's, to be frank, I'll be like, someone would say to me, oh, I'm sorry, it's because I'm a Gemini. I'm like, no, it's because I'm not gonna swear. No, it's because you're an idiot. That's why. But seeing the kind of level and depth to it, I might not take the horoscopes as so seriously, but I'm loving the history lesson I'm getting right now. So
Yeah,
I cannot let you go without, off the top of your head, let's talk about a few signs. Like, give me some breakdown of a few signs, if you don't
sure,
mind.
sure.
Anyone you like.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about sort of the basic sketch that we often find for the horoscopes, and they do differ quite significantly from the way that we talk about horoscopes today, where you look up whether it's online or you examine it, on a newspaper. I don't think anyone actually picks up newspapers anymore, but
Exactly.
it's very different. So let's take Sagittarius, since you're a Sagittarius, right? So there's
Yay.
there's some very traditional explanations. So Sagittarius in the Islamic world is known as al-Qaus. This is the archer
Okay.
or the bow. And
Mm-hmm.
Abu
Yeah.
Mashar, who was one of the famous astrologers, along with Al-Biruni, another famous astrologer, and mashallah, give a series of sort of characteristics of what you can expect from a Sagittarius. And they say that
Mm-hmm.
Sagittariuses are generally attractive, they're noble of spirit, they have a way
Oh,
with
alhamdulillah. That, I
words,
mean, that now that's just facts. That's
that's it.
just
I mean,
facts. Now
here we
I'm
are on a
saying now I believe in horoscopes. Now you see, I,
now
I
it's
knew I knew there's something
it's
missing.
true. I
Now
mean,
it's real.
here you are on a podcast. You have a way with words, right? They're skilled with influencing people. They're also said to be friendly, generous, persuasive, and amiable. So this is kind of basic characteristics, right? So all right, this is
Okay.
the stuff. But then they also go into a little bit more deeper detail. So, for example, they say they're good at philosophy. They tend to be good at religious
Ooh, wow.
matters. They tend to be good at writing and creativity. But they have dual natures. They have a publicly amicable side, that is the side that is very charming and persuasive,
Hmm.
but they have deep passions and interests, and they tend to hold grudges. They don't forgive very easily. So
Oh
there's
my
so
God! Why are you describing my life?
they sketch out all these important and interesting details, but then they go even further, right? Because part of the medieval astrological tradition was about predicting what does it mean for a
Okay.
person's life, like where are things going. So if one of the things that they mentioned is they often have few children but have many partners, they tend to have an inclination for more than one marriage. So this is an aspect of prediction. If you're a Sagittarius, you're going to have more than one partner in your life. So they have these kind of components of mixing
Are you say
temperament.
is Professor Ali telling me that I belong to the streets?
It's a way of saying that this was the original sign of the player. This was the
Oh.
original sign of the person who belonged to the streets.
Disclaimer, guys, I did not belong to this street. This is where horoscopes and astrology goes wrong. But anyway, carry on, please.
But
So, what's
this
my sign to get with?
Yeah, so the fascinating aspect of this would be that a medieval astrologer would not only look at your particular sun sign or your ascendant in particular or in your horoscope, but then may offer a variety of different other things. So there's another component of astrology known as annual forecasting, in which the
Okay.
astrologer would then make specific predictions based off of your years. So, for example, you're 23 years old, we'll say, right? They would then
Yeah.
move the sun back to the exact moment of your birth, which would create a whole new
Wow.
chart because it's in a different year. And based off of that chart, they would then
Mm.
break down the year. This was a very important part of their services that they provided for kings and rulers. Not only were they
Okay.
present at the moment of the king's birth to tell them, okay, your prince is going to live this many years, it's going to become your successor, he's going to be a good successor, liberal minded, friendly, etc. But then would
Yeah.
say, this is the year in which you're going to face a famine, in which your people will go hungry, this is the year in which you'll have a flood, so you
Mm.
need to be mindful of it. And so there was this way of consulting year by year that they would provide for people, so that you have this very complicated system that would take
Wow.
lifetimes of study in order to master. And then they would use this in order to advise kings and rulers, and guide them in regards to both their life, but also in governing society.
Wow. Oh, that. Nah, I'm actually I'm just so mind blown right now. In terms of, I know you're not sure if you know top of your head. Is there any particular sign I should be going for? Since I already belong to the streets, I might as well embrace my
Yes.
nature.
So, like in terms of partners, so there's a very
Yes.
common idea that Sagittarius works very well with signs like Taurus. And Taurus tends to
Okay.
stabilize Sagittarius to a certain
Okay.
degree.
What month
Virgo
is
tends.
Taurus?
Your mom's a Taurus, so there's a connection there.
No, no,
So
no. What month is Taurus?
Taurus is May. So
May. Okay.
it's late April to May. I think May 20th
Okay.
is the cutoff for it.
Okay.
Virgo is another common sign
That's
for.
September, isn't it? I
Yeah,
think
so that's
September, I believe.
September, and then Aquarius is another very common partner for it. Leo sometimes, though they traditional astrologers will say that Leo and Sagittarius butt heads a lot.
Okay.
They tend to have a little bit of tension
If anyone who's listening is a Virgo, an Aquarius, or a
there.
Taurus, please
Slide into the
slide in my
DMs.
DMs. Slide in my DM. They're open. Yeah, we can take over the world together.
I definitely knew that was coming. I knew it.
Is there anything else we should know, or anything you'd like to impart to our listeners on astrology? I mean, I think we
Yeah,
covered so much, but
yeah,
anything you'd like to please add?
a lot of information in a short period of time. So hopefully people find a little bit of interest in this. But fundamentally, the thing that I want to impart is that when academics talk about astrology, it really isn't about whether you should believe in astrology or not. That's not what our
Okay.
interest in. But rather it shows us the complicated way that peoples of the past understood the world around them. It's easy to dismiss
Mm.
medieval people and ancient people and say, "Oh, they're just superstitious," or "Oh,
And they're backwards.
yeah, they're backwards. They didn't have accurate science, and so all this astrology stuff is bunk." But in actuality, what stuff like this demonstrates to us is look at the advanced calculations that are going into it. That speaks
Wow.
to the mathematics, to the algorithms, to the ability to be really
Exactly.
precise. Not just the day that you were born, but the second, the minute, the hour that you were born would then have an impact on you. The way that they were able to understand the movement of the planets is very, I mean, regardless of whether the planet has an effect on your personal life, they're able to accurately determine whether Jupiter will be in Sagittarius 6 years from now. So, what we're
Wow.
looking at is a very advanced way of trying to make sense of the world around us. And that should be similar. That should be familiar to all of us because we're still doing it to this very day. We're just
A
trying to
hundred
figure out
percent.
what our place in the world is. That's all we're trying to do.
Nah, that's epic, man. That's epic. I mean, guys, this has been such a dope conversation. I mean, you can find Professor Ali on Twitter. I'm gonna post his handles in the comments. Please follow him, man. His writings are epic. Like I'm telling you, you can sit there and read his threads, and
Yeah.
it's like you're reading a novel, an
You're
amazing
most
novel.
kind.
So, and so thank you so much for coming on.
It was
This
a
is the Malcolm
pleasure.
Effect with. Thank you so much. This is the Malcolm Effect with Mamadou. Please like, comment, subscribe, whether that be on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or on YouTube. Drop a comment, like, and a rating. Again, I'm definitely going to have you on again if you would be so happy and be so kind to come on again. This has been an absolute pleasure of a conversation for me.
Of course. Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you.